Guilty pleasures? 80s Aussie soaps. Hello gentle viewer. I am going to confess something that may cause you, as a Doctor Who fan or horror fan or why else you watch my videos, to lose all respect for me. I am a bit of a fan of 80s, and perhaps early 90s, Australian soap operas. Now before we carry on, I feel I must make it clear that I don't watch any soap operas these days, and certainly not the Aussie ones, which I consider unrecognizable and unwatchable these days, but I have a deep affection for many of the Aussies soaps of the good old days. The first soap I ever got hooked on was, of course, Sons and Daughters. I've done an epic two-part video on this before, which you are free to watch and laugh at if you so wish, so I'm not going to go over the same ground, but yeah, I got hooked on this at some point in the early to mid-80s, probably during school holidays as it was on in the afternoons on ITV in the UK, and when school started up again I got my mum to tape it for me to watch when I got home, which I did, religiously. I was a very strange child. To this day I still love this show. I watched the reruns on 7/2 down here in Aussie from 2010 to whenever it finished and thoroughly enjoyed the show all over again, and to this day Wayne Hamilton is one of my favorite TV villains of all time. Perhaps it's not so strange for an old Doctor Who fan like me to have also been a fan of this show, given its memorable characters, ludicrously OTT storylines like evil doppelgangers and fantastically melodramatic cliffhangers. The big one that almost everyone thinks of in terms of Aussie soaps is, of course, Neighbours. And yes, I was a fan of this show too. Again, I have to stress the word was. Neighbours was a massive hit in the UK, and was somewhat lighter in tone than Sons and Daughters, replacing the lurid OTT stuff with a more comical tone that has led some people to note that, for several years in the 80s at least, the show was 50% soap opera and 50% situation comedy, with some memorable larger-than-life comedic characters. It also made Kylie Minogue famous, but we'll not hold that against it. As a teenager at the time, Neighbours also gave me my very first celebrity crush in Amelia Frid's Cody Willis. Oh dear me, was I in love. Pause to provide time as the penny drops as to where my channel name came from for several viewers, lol. I was also into Home and Away, at least for its first 2 years, this show being a mix of Neighbours, with teenage characters and some comic ones, but with a touch more of the darker and more lurid Sons and Daughters type storylines. However, all good things must come to an end, and in the 90s my interest in this genre basically went the way of the dodo. Sons and Daughters ended in 1987 after a 6-year run, though that was probably 88 or 89 in the UK, while sadly both Neighbours and Home and Away carried on, and indeed are somehow still on air, by basically becoming different programs entirely, jettisoning most of their casts and getting really fucking boring after a while. Home and Away basically did this after barely 2 years in its 1990 season, and I dropped it at some point afterwards, and Neighbours revamped itself completely in 1992, with the end result being me finally giving that the push in 1993, admittedly not helped by the worst recast in television history, or by repeats of the 1986 season that revealed that, no, my memory wasn't cheating, the show really was much better and more fun in the early days than it was now. Or then. Or now. I still feel like Neighbours had a solid 6-7 year run, and should probably have been put out to pasture by the end of 1991, where it was clearly running out of steam. Arguably its massive success in the UK is the only reason it didn't, but to me from 92 it became a different program with the same name and setting, much like The Bill did in 2002, and it was unrecognizable within 18 months or so. Look, I was very sad when Sons and Daughters, still my fave soap of all time, ended. But now I look back and I'm glad it ended when it did. The last 2 seasons weren't as good anyway, though there's still some very strong stuff in there, but it went out as the same show. If it was still on air now, I've no doubt it would be as unrecognizable and uninteresting as Modern Neighbors and H&A are to me. And I can at least say I love Sons and Daughters without feeling like a fraud or having to add a well, the first 6, 7 years, not the last 20-odd years, which I consider to be offensively unwatchable shit qualifier. Hell, I still liked watching the 80s episodes, but you could not pay me enough to sit through the bollocks that these shows have turned into today. So there. My secret shame revealed. I love 80s Aussie soap operas. You'll still respect me in the morning, right?